Welcome to Countouts. In this lesson, we're going to be looking at the debtors reconciliation. We're going to see how we need to reconcile our debtors control as well as our debtors list. So we're basically focusing on the debtors control and the debtors ledger. So what is debtors control, or what does it do? The debtors control account captures the total of all the entries that are posted to each debtors account in the debtors ledger. So it captures the total of all the entries. So when you see debtors control, it will tell you all the amounts that we are owed by all the debtors. Okay, that total of the debtors control tells us how much we are owed. The balance of the debtors control account at the end of the period should equal to the total of the balances of the individual accounts of each debtor, provided that everything was done correctly. So what we are saying here is that what you have on your debtors control account, that total amount or that final balance, should be the same as all the amounts that we are owed by each debtor. So if we have, let's say, 10 debtors, if we are to add all the amounts that we are owed by all those debtors, it should equal what is in the debtors control account. So that's what we are saying here. But if they are not the same, then we have to perform a debtors reconciliation. And that's the example we're going to look at right now and go through a question where we'll be able to answer this. So what errors are we identifying here? Well, if the debtors control account balance at the end of the period does not equal to the total of the balances of the individual accounts of each debtor, like we've just mentioned, this indicates that one or more errors may have been made. So if they're not the same, your debtors control account and the total of the balances of the individual accounts of each debtor, then we have probably made a mistake somewhere, we have omitted something. So what do we need to do? We need to identify errors that affect the debtors control account and the debtors ledger account. For example, incorrect amount entered in the journal or omitted from the journal. So that is what would affect both your debtors control account and your debtors ledger accounts. And what else do we identify? We identify errors that affect the debtors control account only. And an example for that is posting the wrong amount from a journal to the debtors control. So that should be an error that affects only the debtors control. And what else? Identify errors that affect the debtors ledger only. An example for that would be posting to the wrong debtors account. So that is where students usually battle, by identifying errors that affect the debtors control account and the debtors ledger account, or identifying errors that affect the debtors control account only, as well as identifying errors that affect the debtors ledger only. Mistakes would be made in identifying which one it affects and how we account for them, and that is why the reconciliation will not work well. But in this example, I hope you should be able to do it after we look at this one. So let's go into the example and show you how to do this. We are told that the following information was extracted from the records of Ferrero Mia, a registered VAT vendor. VAT is calculated at 15%. And we are given all these details. We're also told that the entries made in the general journal, we are given down here. And we are also told what errors have been made. And we are asked to do two things. The first one is to prepare the debtors control account and balance the account on the 31st of May 2020. And the second one there is to reconcile the balance in the debtors control account with the corrected total of the debtors list on the 31st of May 2020. And remember, we've been mentioning this, the reconciliation of the debtors control account and the debtors list, they should be the same, the totals of the two. So let's get into the examples and tackle it. Here we are given the totals of the following subsidiary books on the 31st of May 2020. Now, dates here are very important, and you'll see how it applies when we're answering the question. So the first requirement is to prepare the debtors control account and balance the account on the 31st of May 2020. So we are given the following subsidiary books, or the following totals of the subsidiary books, and we are given the cash receipts journal, we are given the sales journal and the sales returns journal. Now you need to know obviously what they stand for and what they are, and I hope you do. And we look at those ones separately in different lessons, where we looked at the cash receipts journal, the sales journal and the sales returns journal. You'll find the links to those lessons in the description below. But the cash receipts journal is where all the cash that we have received are recorded, and we are given the total for the debtors column. Remember here, when you're dealing with the reconciliation of the debtors control account and the debtors list, or the debtors ledger, we are dealing with the debtors column of the various journal accounts. So the cash receipts journal, the debtors column, meaning the money we have received from our debtors, and this is as at the 31st of May 2020. The sales journal is where we record all the sales we have made to our debtors on credit, okay? And then the sales returns journal is where we record everything that has been returned by our debtors, by those who owe us money. And then we are also given here the debtors control balance on the 30th of April 2020. Very important, like I say, dates. So we are given the subsidiary books on the 31st of May, but here the debtors control account we are given on the 30th of April, meaning the end of the previous month. That means this 47,000 Rand for the debtors control has not taken into account any of these three things mentioned on top here. We're also given the total of debtors list on the 31st of May 2020, which is at the end of the month we are working with, because we are preparing these accounts that we are asked to prepare as at the end of the 31st of May 2020. Okay, so let's begin with this one here. Remember, when we are preparing the debtors control account, we are doing the T account, and it's very important that you already know how to do a T account, and I hope you already know that. We'll just be explaining them briefly as we go through it, but we have done a quick lesson where we explained in detail, and it will greatly help you understand how to do the T account or the general ledger. So you'll find the link to that lesson as well in the description below. So here's how we answer our question. We have our debtors control, we draw the T account, obviously the debit on the left hand side and the credit on the right hand side, and then we go back to our question. The first thing that we like to do, or I like to do, is to look at the information that we are given. We look at the journals. I like to look at the journals first and see what they are given. But the first thing that we should do is to put the debtors control balance that we are given as at the beginning of this month or as at the end of the previous month, which is the same thing. The end of the previous month and the beginning of this month is the same thing. So the end of the previous month is the 30th of April 2020, and that's the date at which we have the amount for the debtors control. So we're given the debtors control balance on 30th of April 2020. So that's the balance brought down. So we're just going to take the 47,000 Rand and put it on the debit side. Remember, debtors control is an asset. It increases on the debit side and decreases on the credit side. And I hope you also know your debits and your credits. We'll leave the links to all those lessons to understanding them in the description below. So we put the balance brought down of this 47,000 Rand on the debit side. So we put the date there on the 1st of May because that's the beginning of this month. And then we put balance brought down, and then we put down the 47,000 Rand. Okay, now that we've done that, I like to highlight them after we've done each one. So I've highlighted that one, and then we can begin with the top ones here, the subsidiary books we are given, the totals. The first one there is the cash receipts journal, and it's the debtors column, meaning the people who owed us have paid us, and we have 38,000 Rand there. So the first thing I like to do is to put there the date, and remember this time is the 31st of May because that's the date at which we have those totals for the subsidiary ledger. As you go back here, you'll see the 38,000 Rand, and we're told the subsidiary books are on the 31st of May 2020. So I put the bank, remember cash receipts journal, meaning we're receiving cash from our customers, so it's bank. Okay, and remember we're also dealing with VAT here, so some would like to put bank and VAT, but bank here captures everything. We know that it's including VAT because when our customers pay us, they don't just pay us amount excluding VAT, they pay us including VAT. So I put bank there, but before I put the amount for bank, I need to check from the other information we are given, because we are told that the entries made in the general journal, we need to check that and also look at the errors made and see if there's anything else that affects the debtors column of the cash receipts journal, which we are given here. So is there anything else that will affect this 38,000 Rand? So let's read and see. The entries made in the general journal, we're told debtors with the credit balance were transferred to the creditors ledger. That does not. R. Graham's account, who is a debtor, was written off. That does not affect our CRJ or our cash receipts journal. E. Player's account, who is a debtor, was charged interest on overdue account. That does not as well. Inventory sales of 760. A debtor was wrongly entered in the debtors column of the sales journal as 720. That does not. And then at the debtors column of the cash receipts journal was undercast by 300 Rand. That definitely affects our amount, that 38,000 Rand. We are told that the debtors column of the cash receipts journal, which is where we get this total of 38,000 rand, was undercast by 300 rand. What does that mean? It means that the debtors column in the cash receipts journal omitted 300 rand or left out 300 rand. So it was understated by 300 rand. So what do we need to do? We need to add that 300 rand to the 38,000 rand. I hope that has made sense, and you can see we have nothing else that affects our cash receipts journal debtors column. We're just going to take the 38,000 rand plus the 300 rand, and we will have our answer, which is 38,300 rand. I hope that was simple enough. And why do we put it on the credit side? Because our debtors have paid us. Remember, cash receipts journal, the debtors column records everything that you've been paid by our debtors. That means it reduces our asset, which is the debtors control. Whenever your debtors pay you, they reduce the debtors control, meaning less people now owe us. So we put there the 38,300 rand, and then we go back. I've just highlighted the cash receipts journal because we're done with that one, and we also make sure we highlight the debtors column of the cash receipts journal of 300 rand. And now that we've done that, we continue. Let's look at number 2. Sales journal, we have 54,000 rand. So what is the sales journal? Like I just mentioned previously, the sales journal is where we record everything that we sold to our debtors. So that means our debtors still owe us this 54,000 rand. So we're going to put it on the debit side. And remember, this is at the end of the month. Okay, so it should read the 31st of May. So it's just a typo. I wrote 30th of May instead of 31st of May. So now this is the end of the month after everything has been taken into account. And what do we record into our sales journal? We record our sales to our debtor. So we put their sales, or we put sales and VAT, just indicating that we are owed by our debtors sales inclusive of VAT. Now that we have done that, we'll go back and see if there's anything else pertaining to the sales journal that we need to take account of, like we did for the cash receipts journal. So we have read through many of these, and we need to see if there's anything else that affects that. So remember, we had read them earlier on, and one that I identified there is the inventory sales to one of the debtors, C. Kemboy. So its inventory sales of 760 rand to C. Kemboy, a debtor, was wrongly entered in the debtors column of the sales journal as 720 rand and posted as such. VAT was recorded correctly. So what are we saying here? We sold inventory to our debtor, C. Kemboy, and we were supposed to record the 760 rand, but by mistake, we recorded 720 rand. That means we have understated our sales on credit to this debtor. So what does that affect? That affects our debtors control. Remember, it was entered in the debtors column of the sales journal as 720. So if it affects our sales journal, it will affect our debtors control account. Another thing that it will affect our debtors list. Remember, we are reconciling both the debtors control account and the debtors list to see if they will be the same. And remember, that's the requirement number 2, saying reconcile the balance in the debtors control account with the correct total of the debtors list on the 31st of May 2020. So if they mention to you a debtor, like here they have mentioned C. Kemboy, most likely it affects your debtors list as well. So we have understated the amount that you owe us by how much? Well, that's the difference between 760 rand and 720 rand. So it's 40 rand. So we have understated it. That means we're going to take 54,000 rand here, the sales journal, plus 40 rand. And that's how it will look. 54,000 rand plus 40 rand, and it will give us 54,040 rand. And that one comes from the sales journal. So that's our folio, and I had forgotten to do it here as well. For bank, our folio was cash receipts journal, or CRJ. I hope it's making sense so far. So let's go back and highlight our work. We're going to highlight the sales journal. Before we highlight the error that was made, the 760, which was written by mistake as 720, before we highlight this one here, we also know, like I just mentioned, it affects our debtors list. So let's look for the total of the debtors list, and you can see here under here, we are told the total of the debtors list on the 31st of May 2020 was 61,500 471 rand. So we're going to do that one as well at the same time. So we are doing the second requirement at the same time. So we put the total of the debtors list on the 31st of May 2020 before adjustments, meaning before we take into account the entries that were made as well as the correction of errors that we need to do. And then what do? We put in that amount of 40 rand. Remember that 40 rand? He owes us 760 instead of 720. So we recorded 720. So we need to record the difference, which is the 40 rand. So we're going to write the understated sales amount entered for C Camboy, which is our debtor, and we put there 40 rand as a positive because he owes us 40 rand more because we understated it by 40 rand. And then we go and now highlight the debtors list, the total of the debtors list. Remember, we just put that in as well as the inventory sales of 760. And now that we've done that, we can continue with our work. We look at the third one here. We are told that the sales returns journal, which is the debtors control column that we're focusing on, is 1,300 rand, the sales returns journal. So again, we see if there's anything here pertaining to sales journal in the entries that were made as well as the errors made, and we can see that we have nothing pertaining to sales returns journal or nothing about returns from our debtors. So if there's nothing, we're just going to put the sales returns journal and put the amount of 1,300. And remember, we put it on the credit side because our debtors returned goods back to us. That means they don't owe us that amount again, so we reduce our debtors control. We put it on the credit side. So we put here sales returns journal, and the folio is the sales returns journal here, and you put the 1,300 rand. Now here the details, you don't have to put the word journal, you can just put sales returns. So that was a typo, I was just supposed to put sales returns, and then in the folio you put the sales returns journal, but I don't think that would make you incorrectly if you put the sales returns journal there, but we're just talking about the sales returns of 1,300 rand. And then we can go back and make sure we highlight that one, and then we move on. Entries made in the general journal. Remember, we are making these entries, or we are adjusting our debtors control account because the debtors control balance that we had was as at the end of the previous month. That means there's not taken account of this information. So that's why we are taking them into account now. So we are told here, debtors with credit balances were transferred to the creditor's ledger. So what happened here? So if it had a credit balance, it was reducing our debtors control. So what does it mean? Since we are moving into the creditor's ledger, we need to reinstate the 230 rand in our debtors control. So when you see a note like this, debtors with the credit balances or debtors with credit balances were transferred to the creditor's ledger, then you know that you need to add it back to your debtors control account. So we're going to put it on the debit side as 230 rand. And what is the description? The description there is creditors control. So we're going to put here creditors control, and that's from the general journal, as the question had indicated that those are the entries that were made, and the amount there is 230 rand. I hope it has made sense. Whenever you've moved something to another account, like from debtors to the creditor's ledger, then you will reinstate it, meaning increasing your debtors control. And that's what we've just done. So let's make sure we highlight that one, and then we'll move on to the next one. We're told that R. Graham's account, who is a debtor, was written off. So this guy's account was written off. That is bad debts. Now, I hope you know about bad debts. That's an easy one. You just put it on the credit side of the debtors control account because it's reducing our debtors. Whenever you write off a debtors account, it reduces your debtors. So we're going to put in the 1,105. So we put it on the credit side and we write the bad debts, and obviously that's a general journal, and we put the 1,105 rand. And we go back and we highlight that one. And then we move to the next one. E-player's account, who is a debtor, was charged interest on overdue account, meaning this debtor was supposed to have paid us and has not paid us, so we charge them interest. And whenever we charge them interest, meaning they owe us more. So they owe us more by 66 rand. So whenever they owe us more, we put it on the debit side of the debtors control account. So we're going to take the 66 rand and put it on the debit side. So we go to our debtors control account, we write the interest income. Remember, when you charge your customer interest, that's interest income, and that's the general journal. And then we put the 66 rand. Very easy on that one as well. So we just highlight that one, and you can see we are left with just one last thing to do. We're told inventory returned by C. Warren, 880, including VAT, was not posted to his account in the debtor's ledger. Now, if you pause there, if it was not posted to his account in the debtor's ledger, that means it affects our debtor's list. That means we have to also take account of that. That means we have to deduct it from our debtor's list because inventory was returned by this customer. So we need to reduce his account by 880 because he no longer owes us. He returned the goods back to us. And then we are also told that this was entered in the sales returns journal. Very important. If they didn't tell us that, we're going to put it into our debtors control account as sales returns. But since they told us that this was entered in the sales returns journal, meaning it's not an error that was made or it was posted correctly, so it doesn't affect our debtors control account. It only affects our debtors list or our debtors ledger. So we need to go and deduct the 880 because this debtor C. Warren no longer owes us. So we go to our debtors list, this one over here, and we put sales returns not posted to C. Warren's account, and we put the 880 rand. It's a negative because he no longer owes us. He had returned the goods back to us, but we did not post it to the debtors ledger. As it has said here, it was not posted to his account in the debtors ledger. And now that we are done with that one, we highlight it. And then as you can see, we have just completed all that we needed to do. And we've taken account of everything. Now all that we need to do, remember the first one said prepare the debtors control account and balance the account on 31 May 2020. Now balancing the account is like closing off the account to see what balance we have at the end, and we showed how to do that when we were doing a lesson on the general ledger or how to do the general ledger. So I hope you know, so let's get into it now. You can see we have done everything that we needed to do. So what we need to do, we need to identify which side is bigger between the debit side and the credit side. So you just need to add them and see which side is bigger. But even without adding, you can see our debit side is the bigger one. So if you add everything together, you put the total on the debit side, 101,336, and then you put the same total on the credit side, 101,336, and then you ask yourself what is missing on the credit side to make it equal to 101,336, meaning equal to the debit side. So we're going to take 101,336 minus all this, and it's going to give us what is called the balance carried down. So we're going to put it on the credit side, balance carried down, and what I was missing there is the 60,631 rand. And we know now that is our closing balance for the debtors control. So we're going to put it on the debit side. So when we put it on the debit side, it's going to be written balance brought down, and you put the exact same amount as the one from balance carried down of 60,631 rand. If you know your general ledger, it should have been easy for you to complete this or to close off the account or to balance off the account. And now once we've done that, we know that our debtors list balance here at the end of the period should be the same as the 60,631 rand. If they are not the same, you have made a mistake somewhere. So you need to go back and check where you have made the mistake. So let's check. We're now going to add the 61,471 rand plus the 40 rand minus the 880 rand, and it has to give us the same one as 60,631 rand, and we will have done everything correctly. So what does it give us here? It gives us the 60,631 rand if you calculated it as well, and that is the corrected debtors list total at the end of the month, meaning 31 May 2020. And you can see the total balance in our debtors control account is the same as the total balance in our debtors list total. And I hope you have followed along well. I hope you're able to see how we reconcile our debtors control account to our debtors list and see how we do every item together. If you have gained value from this lesson, please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share it to those you think it might help. Till next time, cheers.